Good afternoon to everyone. Today we are broadcasting another hour's seminar series, and today's seminar will be held by Dr. Azimjan Ktakunov. He is a senior research fellow in our institute, and today's topic will be the new phase of the European Union, Central Asian cooperation, temporary or strategic rapprochement. From the title, as you can see, we will potentially hear quite interesting relations information and how the European Union cooperation with Central Asia, because from the literature we also know that there's many sayings like old wine, new bottle, or the new rapprochements, all those agreements coming from renewed by decades. And recently, we are also seeing some more interactions bilaterally between Kazakhstan and European Union, or European Union, and to a certain extent to NGOs in Kyrgyzstan also. So today we will see with the presentation of Dr. Ktakunov how the general process is going and the recent developments. So without further delay, Dr. Ktakunov, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear colleagues. So let me share my presentation. So can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So today I'm going to talk about bilateral relations between the European Union and Central Asia. And my title is New Phase of the European Union. So what caused this new phase of bilateral relations between the European Union and Central Asia, and whether this is a temporary or strategic rapprochement. So here we see that since the independence of Central Asian states, the European Union has been one of the key actors in the region, promoting bilateral relations through the Partnership and Cooperation Agreements of 1999 and the Enhanced Partnership and Cooperation Agreements. So the European Union adopted two strategies towards Central Asia. The first one in 2007, which focused on responding to security threats, protecting human rights, promoting economic development, transport and energy links, and ensuring environmental protection. In 2019, this strategy was updated, and the updated strategy pushes three priority areas for bilateral cooperation, including partnering with the region for resilience, prosperity, and supporting regional cooperation in Central Asia. So, under cooperation for resilience, the EU promotes human rights and democracy, security, and environmental challenges. Cooperation for prosperity includes economic diversification and private sector development and enhancement of intra-regional trade. So, EU remains, beside being a major investor and trade partner, EU remains the #1 donor in the region. So you see here that this is a good achievement of the Union, that assistance reached 1.1 billion for the period of 2014 and 2020. And it is important to know that EU mobilized 123 million euro for Central Asia during the pandemic, adopted special assistance programs for Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan with a 3 million budget. And of course, EU delivered vaccines to Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. However, there is a skepticism and criticism of the adopted programs. So many experts are very skeptical. So they say that the updated strategy of the European Union has no new positions. So as in the older case, it is based on strategic location, energy resources, market energy, regional security, promotion of democracy, and improvement of human rights. So, and we know that this region achieved almost no progress in terms of institutional development. And of course, many experts criticize why there is a need for training opportunities on human rights and advocacy skills for civil society activists. And there is a good view, and one very important view, that some experts call the new strategy of the European Union of 2019 and the new EU Central Asian strategy is the old EU Central Asia strategy in a fresh PDF. So, however, many experts call on European diplomats that can and will influence regional politics, but the new strategy doesn't put forward any new ideas on how they plan to do so. So if we take bilateral relations between the European Union and individual countries, so we should start with Kazakhstan as a key partner of the European Union. You will see that in December 2015, the European Union and Kazakhstan signed the EPCA, which entered into force on March 1, 2020. And Kazakhstan became the first country to sign the EPCA from the Central Asian region. So some statistics, very important statistics, to understand the bilateral relations between Kazakhstan and the European Union. The EU remains the country's first trade and investment partner, representing 40% of its external trade and 48% of total foreign direct investment flows. In 2006, the parties signed a memorandum of understanding on energy cooperation. So energy cooperation is a key area of bilateral cooperation between Kazakhstan and the European Union. And this memorandum addresses energy security and investment, construction and upgrading of transportation infrastructure, and industrial cooperation. Kazakhstan exports more than 70% of its oil to the European Union, which is 6% of EU oil demand. And Kazakhstan is the single largest supplier to the EU nuclear energy industry and meets more than 21% of the EU uranium demand. And if we take Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, we can see that Kyrgyzstan initiated negotiations on the EPCA in July 2019. The EU granted Kyrgyzstan GSP Plus scheme, which allows the country to export 6,200 products to the Union without any kind of tariffs. And over the period of 2014 and 2020, the EU allocated 174 million to projects strengthening rule of law and the development of education and rural areas. In terms of Tajikistan, we see that in 2019, Tajikistan requested to upgrade the current PCA of 1991 through the negotiation of the EPCA. It implemented the country strategy at multi-annual implementation program for 2014-2020 with an allocated bilateral financial envelope of 231 euro. And during the same period, the EU planned to provide Tajikistan 251 million as grants. So in terms of Turkmenistan, of course, we know that Turkmenistan, regarding the foreign policy, is a neutral country and it's a closed country, but it is of great interest of the European Union. The parties have a memorandum of understanding on cooperation in the field of energy, so which facilitates the information exchange on energy policies and the diversification of transit routes. The bilateral relations between the parties are part of the interim trade agreement signed in 2010, and the PCA between the parties is under ratification by the European Parliament. So, and this is an Uzbekistan, it's an interesting case after the opening policy, which is being conducted by the current president Mirziyoyev. So we see that EU supports ongoing reforms in Uzbekistan and provides financial assistance to Uzbekistan annually. So during the 2014 and 2020, It allocated 168 million in financial aid to Uzbekistan, and 124% increase over the 2007-2013 period. In July 2022, the European Union and Uzbekistan successfully concluded and initialed the new EPCA. The EU also granted Uzbekistan privileges of the GSP Plus scheme due to positive economic and political reforms. And this scheme will allow Uzbekistan to export more than 6,200 commodity items to the EU without tariffs. And it should be noted here that also Uzbekistan was granted by the same scheme by the United Kingdom. And also, it is also, but the UK now, we know that this is not a part of the European Union, but anyway, this is a good achievement for Uzbekistan to diversify its exports and to supply its products, manufacturing and agricultural products to the developed market. So here we can conclude on the EU policy in Central Asia that the EU implements a comprehensive policy towards Central Asia, which includes both bilateral, including in particular PCAs and EPCAs, regional, when the European Union follows its strategies adopted in 2007-2019, and multilateral. Of course, the European Union supports the region in international platforms such as supporting individual countries of Central Asia in their process of WTO accession. So it plays an important role in terms of trade, investment, financial assistance, and provides the countries of the region with trade preferences. So 3 of the 5 CA countries benefit from favorable access to the EU market for the GSP and GSP+. The EU trade agreements should cover non-trade policy objectives of a political, human rights, democracy, security and peace, combating terrorism and corruption, and economic nature, so environmental protection. So this is just a caution. This is just a important point for Central Asian countries to understand that the EU pushes political NTPOs in agreement with smaller countries, offering them preferential access to its market in exchange for political concessions. So the GSPs should be considered as another political and economic tool of the EU's Central Asia policy. But at the same time, the countries of Central Asia in turn lack the EU policy and push a country-based interests, including retaining markets, attracting investments and financial aid, and obtaining trade preferences. So what is the trade relations between, what are the trade relations between Central Asia and the European Union, and did the EU-CA trade become more diversified? So I want to mention a couple of words about why trade is important. So we can see here that trade plays an important role in establishing close economic ties between countries and regions. It affects a country's economic growth with its openness to international trade, PTAs, and trade structure increases revenue and boosts productivity, contributing to poverty reduction, which is very important for Central Asian case. Facilitating trade with reforms to improve customs procedures has a significant positive impact. And the very important point here for the region is that diversification is not necessarily a product of state support for industrial policy, but a natural result of trade intensification, including through integration. So if the Central Asian and European Union countries can integrate closely, so this can result in trade. This can result in diversification processes because of the processes of learning by doing, learning by exporting and others. So trade's positive impacts also include contribution to the development of infrastructure and political stability. So these effects are important as the countries of Central Asia aim to diversify their export by trade intensification with the EU. So we know, as I mentioned previously, GSP scheme, GSP Plus schemes, and many others, which in turn here supports the region's trade-related problems. These are trade figures. You see here that bilateral trade increased substantially. So if we compare initial 2002 data with 2021 data, so by total trade between the regions increased from more than from 5.5, around 5.5 billion to more than 32 billion in 2021. So the trade peaked in 2014, reaching almost $58 billion. So here you see that the key trade partner of the European Union Central Asia is Kazakhstan. So total trade with which increased from 3.6 billion to almost 29 billion for the reported period. And then share of Kazakhstan Central Asia's total trade with the EU changed from 65% to 85% in the same period. During the peak periods, so the share varied between 90 and 92%. So these are Central Asian exports to and imports from the European Union in millions. So you can see that exports, as I mentioned previously, the share of Kazakhstan in Central Asia's exports in 2002, it was around 70%. Now, in 2021, it was 96%. So the remaining four countries share equals low 4%. But in terms of imports, the situation changed. You see here that Kazakhstan's the highest share of Kazakhstan was observed in 2005, 75%, and however, and in 2002 it was 64%, and in 2021 it decreased to 56%. And look at their share of Uzbekistan, which started to trade more intensively with the European Union and import more products from the European Union. So its share in total Central Asian imports increased from 90% in 2002 to 31% in 2021. These are trade deficits between Central Asia and the European Union by products. So you see top three products. So machinery, so leading products, then pharmaceutical products, electrical machinery and equipment. So in 2021, for instance, trade deficit for machinery was around $2.5 billion. And other products which also are traded with deficit for Central Asia, including optical, photographic and other equipment, vehicles, aircraft, essential oils, articles of iron and steel, plastics, furniture, live animals, and other agricultural products. So these are the trade circles between Central Asia and the European Union. So we see that generally Central Asia provides the European Union mineral fuels. So trade balance was positive for the region, and in 2021, only for mineral fuels, it exceeded $21 billion. And you see that generally the region specializes in mineral fuels, metals, cotton, fertilizers, cereals. So, but the trade deficit trade balance for fertilizer for cereals, sorry, is around $70 million in 2021. So this is the trade balance of Central Asian states with individual countries of the European Union. So you see that all countries, so this trade balance is positive with all countries except Germany. And it is a very important point here is that all countries of Central Asia except Kazakhstan have trade deficits with their EU partners. For instance, in 2021, the trade deficit of Kyrgyzstan amounted to 238 million, Tajikistan 198 million, Turkmenistan 373 million, and Uzbekistan 2.8 billion. So Kazakhstan's trade balance was positive and amounted to 17.6 billion. So we see that bilateral trade flows between the EU and CA became less diversified, which put the Central Asian region at risks. So firstly, of course, these risks are connected with price fluctuations, which may substantially reduce the region's exports in value terms, making its imports from the EU complicated. So how to pay for import from the EU if we don't have enough export revenues. Second, the EU's green policy and its aim to reduce dependence on fossil fuels is an important challenge for Central Asian countries. for the countries of Central Asia, it is important not to substitute one dependence oil and gas for another rare earth metal. So here, but despite being a challenge, this point is also an opportunity for Central Asia. For instance, Kazakhstan and the EU signed an agreement on the development to develop supplies of green hydrogen and raw materials in Egypt. It happened in Egypt. The particular interest of the EU include rare earth magnets for wind turbines, lithium and cobalt for batteries, and polysilicon for semiconductors. So Kazakhstan has some 50,000 metric tons of deposits. So Swevind is a Swedish company, one of the most important, is running a green hydrogen project called Irasier 1. The plant's production capacity is estimated at 1/5 of the amount the EU will import in 2030. The project's preliminary cost ranges from 40 to 50 billion. So the third risk is transportation of fossil fuels remain complicated due to geopolitical situation, putting Central Asian exports at additional risks. So this is connected with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the geopolitical conflict in the Eurasia. And finally, political dependence on the EU may increase given the size of the EU and Kazakhstan's mineral fuel exports. So geopolitical crisis changed the bilateral relations between the European Union and Central Asia. And here we can say that the EU started this new era with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Union's policy against Russia is recognized as a birth of a geopolitical Europe, and many EU policies, including trade, investment, competition, and research and technology, will take into consideration power politics and become both tougher and more flexible. And the EU enhances resilience by reducing asymmetric dependencies, building capacity in strategic sectors, and protecting the EU from external coercion. And after the war in Ukraine, the EU politicians reconsidered the role of Central Asia in the Union's foreign policy. So in October 2022, President of the European Council, Charles Michel, paid his first official visit to Kazakhstan capital and held a summit with the presidents of the CA states. It is important to note here that despite all positive changes, the joint communique after the EU Central Asia leaders meeting didn't mention Ukraine directly, which was a sign of Central Asia's desire for neutrality on the matter. So later, on November 17 and 18, the EU's top diplomat, Joseph Borrell, visited Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan to meet Central Asian foreign ministers at the EU Central Asia Connectivity Conference. He promoted new links between the regions and talked about excessive dependencies, which come at a cost. So according to Borrell, the EU respects and endorses the desire of Central Asia to reject dependency on any single international partner, regardless of history or geography. And he called for wider networks and emphasized that EU-CA connectivity would not be at the expense of other connections. So, and of course, it is worth noting that the Union has allocated 300 million in funding for the region over the next 4 years. So, in November, also, at the invitation of President of France, Macron, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev paid an official visit to France. So the presidents welcomed the major transport initiatives in Central Asia, so generally, in particular, the Middle Corridor. They expressed support for the implementation of the European Global Gateway project. And this Global Gateway project can be an efficient program that can increase interdependence of the regions and deepen their cooperation in terms of energy, transport, among others. So, this will depend on EU's ability to finance infrastructure and other manufacturing development projects in Central Asia. So, in November also, the President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, paid a 2-day official visit to France, and the parties signed 14 agreements worth more than 6 billion euros. And however, despite calling for that these relations and this deepening of the interaction between the parties will not come at the expense of the third parties. The EU delegation in Uzbekistan announced that all areas of the EU cooperation with Central Asia, varying from water resources to digitalization, will be aimed at reducing the region's dependence on Russia. So the EU ambassador to Uzbekistan, Shavol Drian, explained that the EU didn't want the exclusivity of the relationship between the regions, so it aims to ensure freedom of choice. At the same time, allocated 83 million to finance the multi-year indicated program for 2021-2027, including 7 million to support the development of civil society and human rights. So this is a contradiction. So at the same time, they say that this will not, the cooperation between the new level of cooperation between the parties will not come at the expense of any third parties. And the diplomats saying that any action, any policy, any program will have a goal to reduce the region's dependence on Russia or other players in the region. So this is a contradiction. It's a great contradiction which can have some kind of consequences for bilateral relations between European Union and Central Asia. So despite the improvements in the learning practices, the main lens through which the European Union looks at the region remains geopolitical, and this determines the limits of EU learning from the start. However, it is important to note that the Union wants to learn more about Central Asia to find a better approach to win over local actors in this region, and it does so by creating an impression of congress of interest. So the second important point that the European politicians should take into consideration that its institution building and human rights policy in Central Asia kept the Union out of geopolitical competition with China and Russia in the region. As a result, the EU started reformulating its policy towards CA, recognizing that geography continues to shape geopolitics in Central Asia, putting more emphasis on state resilience rather than democratization in Central Asia and engaging with other actors in the wider region. So this is my last slide. So the EU's approach changed substantially following the Ukraine conflict. Announcements of the EU politicians to reduce the Russian or other influences in the region show the vulnerability of Central Asia to external pressure and its weakening positions. The EU will need to compete with other actors such as Russia and China. The second important point is that to gain importance, the EU needs to substantially increase investments in the region to assist diversification of Central Asian economies. And it is important for the EU to implement joint projects. So, and of course, here I want to add one important thing, that EU should escape politicization of any economic project. So the EU should show why the European investors are better investors than their competitors in the region. For the countries of Central Asia, it is important not to become a side of geopolitical conflicts, and they need to pursue their economic goals by implementing structural reforms. So by engaging with the EU, states of Central Asia need to include the freedom of choice, not substituting one dependence for another. Countries of the region should remember that trade and other economic dependencies became more important political tools, and geopolitical crises cause the current rapprochement, and each side tries to find solutions to the war-induced challenges such as energy crisis or transportation disruptions. The EU-CA strategic rapprochement, in turn, will depend on the ability of the Central Asian states to implement gradual institutional reforms. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm ready to have a discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Ktakno, for your well-prepared presentation. That we have seen a lot of new numbers and some of the information that we already know get updated also. And from the geopolitical and geoeconomic stances, we will see your portray of European Union's position on its relations with Central Asia. First of all, I would like to give the floor to our audience to take the questions, and afterwards, I will also add my comments and questions. So, dear colleagues, dear guests, if you have any questions, you are welcome. And you can ask in English, Russian, Kazakh, which language is suitable for you. Yes, Dr. Albina Murapakova, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Azimjan, for a very interesting presentation. I have two questions. You have already overviewed the current situation between EU and Central Asian countries, and my question on the events happening today about the EU Central Asia Economic Forum, which is now taking place in Almaty. So what do you expect from this economic forum? My first question is how this, so what is the main aim of this forum, and how it will impact to the further development of the relations between EU and Central Asia? And the second question is on sanctions. How do you think the sanctions, which is now being discussed in the EU, will impact the secondary sanctions to Central Asian countries along with other countries that helps to escape the sanctions on Russia? How this will impact on the relations between EU and Central Asia? Thanks.
Okay, thank you for interesting questions. Regarding the first question, regarding economic forum and its potential impact on bilateral relations between EU and Central Asia, I think that this will depend on the ability of Central Asia to present important manufacturing projects that can truly diversify the economies of Central Asia. So if Central Asia should be interested in implementation of joint projects with the European companies, then these joint projects are not necessarily be in energy sector. So we need to diversify European investments and attract investments in the agricultural sector, because we have a great agricultural potential here to use these investments, to use their knowledge, to use their technology, and to become exporters of agricultural products, including to the European market, the market of the Eurasian Economic Union and China. So at the same time, of course, we need to do reforms in order to attract European investments. And of course, the future of European investments will depend on our ability to make efficient reforms. At the same time, as I mentioned, energy cooperation is also very important. We should cooperate with the European Union in terms of energy, but those revenues, energy revenues, should be used efficiently for diversification and industrialization of Central Asian economies. Otherwise, we will have some problems, and all these problems regarding our economy. So all our problems stem from our economy. So that is why we should use the potential of the EU to industrialize and to increase our welfare and our economic opportunities and capacities. The second question regarding secondary sanctions, of course, it is very important to consider secondary sanctions, but if in the case of EU will impose some kind of sanctions on Central Asian countries, so these secondary sanctions on region will weaken the European Union's positions, and it will be again out of competition with other important players such as Russia, China, or other increasing powers like Turkey. So that is why I think it is not of interest of the European Union to impose sanctions on Central Asia, because we don't do such. I don't think that this is a trade flows. So countries import trade and they import some kind of products and they export their products. So it shouldn't be something illegal, but it is better to direct all efforts to stop the war instead of imposing endless number of sanctions on all countries. So it is of interest of European politicians. And of course, we are interested to retain good political relations with the EU, but all these issues regarding sanctions should be discussed carefully with us. And we should also discuss these issues with the European Union to find a good solution, not to harm our economic interests and political cooperation. I hope I answered your interesting questions.
Yes, thank you.
Is there any other questions? Okay, so let me give my short comment, and I have also some questions I would like to ask. First of all, yeah, the point you mentioned about the sanctions and Kazakhstan should be dealt with this situation individually and separately will be beneficial for the country, of course. And my question is more in general perspective about, as you know, that these economic cooperations, economic unions, they are creating blocks. And if you are in it, it's good, it has advantages, but if you are outside, it brings certain obstacles to others. So Kazakhstan and some other countries, Kyrgyzstan and many others, Russia, become created and continued the Euro Customs Union, then Eurasian Economic Community, which turned into a Eurasian Economic Union in 2015. So my question is more about, in this perspective, that as we know that European Union with this neighborhood policy and association agreements has signed deep free trade agreements with Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And as we know that these agreements are blocking for Russia to engage more deeper economic connection with them. From this perspective, when we look at the dates, the Eastern Neighborhood policy was started actively in 2009. Then we have seen the 2014 European Union's movement, and just 1 year later, the Eurasian Economic Union was established in 2015. So can we say that there was an economic influence competition between European Union and Russia together the rest of the common CSS countries in that perspective? Because since Kazakhstan is the member of the Eurasian Economic Union, it will be much more difficult for Kazakhstan to go even more institutionally develop its economic and relations with European Union. So on that perspective, do you see any general policy agendas aiming on developing these institutional developments rather than bilateral trades and trade investments?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Of course, the neighborhood policy and the expansion of the European Union is a political project, a global political project. It has clearly defined political goals. And the European Union wants to expand more to find new markets. And at the same time, Russia also with the Eurasian integration strategy. This is also an important integration projects through which Russia tries to retain its influence and retain its economic impact on the post-Soviet space. And if we discuss integration processes, the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union are two competing. Of course, the economic power, the political capacities, opportunities are different, but these two integrations are competing, especially for Ukraine. You know that in 2014 and previously Russia tried to convince the Ukraine to become a part of the customs union. This is a big market. This is a technologically advanced market. So, in terms of the comparing with the post-Soviet countries, so that is why they convinced. They gave many preferences to Ukraine to retain its positions within the Eurasian Economic Union and become of the important part of the Eurasian processes. But what happened? We know what happened. Ukraine rejected all of that, and its choice was to integrate with the European Union, and all these things happened related to Crimea Spring, related to the ongoing war. So that is why these are two competing projects. They both have economic and political goals. Both have, of course, energy goals. And in terms of Kazakhstan, what our country gained from Kazakhstan is when the regional organization is being formed, for instance, any integration in terms of preferential trade agreement or deeper forms of integration like customs union or economic unions are connected with trade creation and trade diversion. So if we create an organization with Russia or with other countries, of course, initial impact will be in higher volumes of trade, because we set common external tariffs and we start to import less and export more to our trade partners. But this is not prohibited, you know, that this is allowed within the World Trade Organization, Article 24, that regional trade agreements are allowed to form, and there are a great number of regional trade agreements, not at the regional level, but also at bilateral level. We know a great number of regional trade agreements, free trade agreements of China, of Japan, of South Korea, Australia, the United States also is very active in forming all these trade agreements. So that is why, and all of them have, as I noted in my presentation, if we look at the EU's policy, non-trade political objectives, which they grant for GSP plus schemes. So they demand some kind of political preferences to those countries which are granted by those preferential schemes. So if you are allowed tariff-free to the European market export, I mean, if you're allowed to trade without tariffs, then the European Union can ask you to make some political preferences to the Union. So all of them have political goals. All of them have goals to open new markets and to increase both economic impact and political influence.
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, as we know that WTO does not restrict any regional organization being established or in any kind, because in their, as you mentioned, 24th article, they say if the tariff contradicts with WTO, the rules of the WTO should be applied. So they cover that with this rule. That's why they don't allow they don't restrict.
One more thing that I want to add here: the recent trade dispute between Ukraine and Poland, Romania. That farmers of Poland, Romania, and several European countries were unhappy with substantial growth of Ukraine's exports, and Poland decided to stop the transit of the of those amounts of agricultural products because of the increasing competition and the drop of prices for producers of the European countries. So these are all about markets, about prices. So that is why we should take into consideration that despite being a part of some kind of agreements, the interests of individual countries will be key for many. And if these individual countries are powerful, they will impose their laws and their rules. So that is why the process is how to increase the freedom of choice, how to find better partners, how to find many partners, and how to become economically independent, using all available resources to industrialize and to make the economy more diversified.
Yeah. As far as I know, they are right now talking about some transit transfer to solve the issue, because grain is a strategically important product. It needs to be distributed, and Ukraine plays a huge part for most of the countries. And the neighbors also, their position could be understandable from economic perspective. So thank you again for your contribution to this answer also. Dear colleagues, dear guests, if you have any more questions. So if there is none, first of all, Dr. Kitakunam, thank you for your presentation and your answers. Of course, most of us are well aware with the economic trends and going on in our region, in Eurasia also, but with the information that we gained today from your presentation was greatly useful. Potentially could be used in many other articles, comments, analysis also. So we would like to thank you for your well-prepared presentations. And dear guests and colleagues, so thank you for your attention. We will continue with our seminar series in the following weeks. So goodbye and see you.
Goodbye.
Have a good day and weekend.